Hello gamers. This morning I saw a tweet that at first just kind of made me chuckle, but when I returned to the tweet just a few hours later, what was initially just a sensible chuckle turned into a sensible furrowed brow of concern. This might actually be one of the worst tweets that I've ever read, at the very least when it comes to gaming that actually gains traction. The initial tweet was this clip reposted by Jake Lucky, which shows a Splitgate 2 pro popping off and doing what he does best, just portaling around and shooting at dudes, and looking impressive while doing it. But this was then quote tweet with the tweeter or Xer poster, whatever you want to call it, saying that this literally is the reason online PvP games die. The game hasn't even been released yet, and he's already tryharding to his fullest potential. That he's actively on stream, optimizing the fun out of it for everyone else lucky enough to get access who just wanted to play something new. And like I said, this plus some of the comments ragging him in the replies initially when the tweet wasn't popular made my morning. It was kind of fun just to read people making fun of him. But that was before it started catching a lot of attention. And by the time of writing the script for this video, it's gone from 32,000 likes to 37,000 likes. So it's safe to say that this is a sentiment that people seem to agree with, and more people seem to be agreeing with what he has to say. And it really shows a worrying trend when it comes to video games, or PvP ones especially. And I really think that we need to talk about it. I mean, if you just scratch the surface of the tweet, the whole premise of it kind of falls apart. Is this really the reason PvP games die? Like, actually, I can see that players might not enjoy having their PvP experience becoming more sweaty, where they have to try harder and they just can't hang the way that they used to, which means that they move on to something else or quit the game entirely. But aren't there features in the game to mitigate this, to stop this from happening? You know, there's been so much drama about SBMM that is put in place for this exact reason. I'm going hands-free. I would try to do a cool thing, but you can't even see my hand. There's no point. I want to do something with my hands. And either way, why is it the fault of the people that play a competitive game to improve and win and having fun while doing so? Like, why are we villainizing people just for getting good? Like, at the end of the day, don't we all want the same thing? Everyone wants to play video games and have fun. Even people who play video games for a living, to a certain extent, still want to have fun when they play video games. And for them, in most cases, the process of improving and getting better at the game that they're playing and then reaping the rewards of all of this effort is part of the fun. And even if it isn't, I would still argue that no matter who you are, winning is gonna be more fun than losing. I guess unless you go through super boring tactics to get the win, then that's not necessarily fun. If you camp for 20 minutes, it's not really a fun win. I'll concede that, but that's not what's happening in the clip. That's not something most sweats go for. And you could answer, you could say, hey, I have a lot of fun without winning, which can be a fair response. But then the tweet doesn't really apply to you, because how does someone putting the time and effort in to the point where they play better, which might mean you lose more games, impact your enjoyment of the game, right? It's not about winning, it's about having fun. So just saying, if we assume that winning, or at the very least doing decently okay at a game, makes it fun to play, then I think it's safe to assume that people want a decently balanced game, since doing well or winning is the epitome of what people would call fun. In a PvP setting, I would argue that most people at the very least want to be average or slightly above it. In my opinion, that's where I would place the fun zone. And it's an important concept because depending on matchmaking and what type of game you're playing and what type of person you are, getting closer to the top 1% or the top 0.1% can lead to having more fun and enjoying the game more. But ultimately, it leads to sweatier games and a sweatier experience, which takes more time and energy and practice. And I'll be honest, most players, at the very least the casuals, are just not into spending that effort for that reward. So with all of this in mind, I think it's safe to assume that too many games are fun, enjoyable, and not ruined when they play the game and they play at a slightly above average level, where they can still play against people and win against them, but with not that much effort when they're still in that fun zone. But the thing is, right? Any game out there, any multiplayer, even single player game, PvP, PvE, co-op, but especially obviously competitively minded games or with a ranked mode or with an esports scene, will have an ever evolving player base. Even chess has an evolving player base, right? You take Magnus Carlsen and you put him against some king back in the 1600th century. Magnus Carlsen is going to wipe the floor with that king. It's going to be no contest whatsoever. Because the average player in any game will get better at it. Any person doing something will get better at what they do over time. If they play against someone, it's a compounding effect because they're playing against each other and learning from each other and, kind of like sparring against each other. And over time, they will also improve really, really fast. So if you're an average player or above average player, then if you just play a game once a day or every few days, you should usually keep up with that part of the skill curve. So if we can assume something, I want to say to these types of people that agree with the original post, maybe even the original poster himself, what ruins a game is when it becomes sweaty. It's a very common saying, oh, this game sucks now, it got all sweaty. I enjoyed this game, but then all the sweats came. What does that mean? What does it mean when a game is sweaty? It's when everyone else is better than them. As in, they are the players below average. Sure, they might have been average at one point, maybe when they picked the game up or when the game was new, but then they fell behind, and instead of putting the effort in and getting better at the game, they decided that, no, actually, this game has just gotten too sweaty. I'm not going to practice it. I'm not going to learn or try to improve. I don't want to try. And they just hop on to the next thing or complain that it's getting too sweaty. And as somebody who's naturally found himself at, if I'm going to be honest, the average level of players at every game that I start playing for the last 15 years, which I then, quickly pick up, and I do put the time in and grind to get ahead of the average player towards that 1% or the 0.1%. I just feel like this whole sentiment is really weird. It's illogical. Because what am I supposed to do? What are people like us supposed to do? It's not like I can just turn my skill off with a flick of a button. And even if I could, then I wouldn't have fun, right? It's not fun to play Monopoly, and then for whatever reason, you just have to keep giving money away because everyone else just sucks at making investments. And I mean, even if I do something like that, I start playing off meta builds or don't really try as hard, I guess. Like, to a certain extent, it becomes muscle memory with recoil control and hitting your shots and whatever. And if you're actively trying to lose, it's just a pain in the ass. Nobody has fun. I don't have fun if I'm making myself lose intentionally. And the other player probably won't have fun either because they can kind of sense that they're being toyed with. And even then, the odds are, from experience, that I still win. I'm not trying to rub my ego here. It's just the fucking truth. And in many cases, the average player will just have a hard time dealing with it. And for the average, or I guess below average players to stomp their feet, start insulting me or other sweaty players or good players just because we play the game to get better and get wins as a result, and ruining their fun, which in other words kind of just sounds like not letting them win, is insane to me. But it's not like it matters that much anyways, since almost every single game that has been released in the last decade or so, except XDefiant, have skill-based matchmaking built into, well, the matchmaking. It protects these new players, the bad players, the average players, whatever, from fighting somebody who grinds the game like it's a job. If you are struggling because you're playing against the top players of a game, that's either because the game is really dead, has a very small player base, and it doesn't have a choice to do together, or there's some weird matchmaking thing going on to increase retention. Most likely, you are better than the average player, but you actually met your match and now you're losing games and you're upset about it. And what makes it worse is the fact that this post is actively getting likes. It's growing. People are agreeing with this guy. I cannot really do much else than assume that these are the types of people who strongly support things that we have covered on this channel, or maybe the main channel, assuming we put it on More Otter. And if this is on More Otter, hit the subscribe. And on my streams before, things that lower the barrier of entry and makes it easier for the below average or average player to feel like they're better at the game than they actually are, which also usually comes at the cost of the experience for the above average or top players. But, things like SBMM, aim assist, overpowered weapons, or overpowered heroes being my biggest examples. And I'm really honing in on this because, as with a lot of things we've seen lately, this growing sentiment would be unpopular just a few years ago. People would not agree with this guy at all. But gaming has become more and more commodified and more accessible, which can be good, but it's to a fault. And we've been seeing a rise of players who want to do well and they want to win their games but they don't want to put in the effort to do so. They just want the wins and they want them now. Sorry, there's a car outside. I live on the first floor. It's a sentiment that I've seen in almost every single PvP game, especially the ones with casual appeal like Apex Legends, where the so-called sweats get an insane amount of hate just for being good and for winning games or doing very well in their games. And it got so bad that it got to a point where the community is divided between casual players and pro players or streamers or sweats or whatever, and the casuals are confined to their own bubble. And if any competitive or I guess good players would start entering that bubble, start posting on the main Apex subreddit, for example, then they would immediately get dragged. They would get shunned, lynched, whatever, and the post probably would get massively downvoted and not get anywhere. It's an innate, blatant hate for anyone who is better than the average, for anyone who stands out from the rest. Then again, it's Reddit. That's kind of on par for the course, but this happens all across the community. On the inverse, there are games where being good isn't a bad thing. It isn't a curse. Games like League of Legends, games like Counter-Strike, both give their sweats recognition for the amount of time and energy and effort that they've spent into getting good. They actually get respected for it without the barrage of insults or whatever other bullshit. It's like people forget that in a player versus player game, there will be another player on the other side of the screen. If you want to beat them, you need to play better than them. If you don't complain. Go play a PvE game. And I mean, to a certain extent, we have been seeing a rise in single player games and PvE games and in co-op games. We've seen them breaking concurrent player records back to back to back every few months. There's single player or co-op games like Pal World. There are looter shooters without PvP, like The First Descendant, and all-rounders like Minecraft or GTA 5, which can signify that some players or a part of the player base are tired of PvP, but in most cases, instead of going to these PvE games, they just hop into the next big PvP game, hoping that things will be any different. They won't, or at least not for a while. Not to mention that we're talking about Splitgate 2 here. It's a arena shooter. Arena shooters are naturally going to be sweaty. That's the whole nature of an arena shooter. They're probably the biggest skill check when it comes to gaming genres out there. Other examples would be something like Quake, which used to be one of the biggest esports at one point. Incredibly sweaty, jumping around the arena, super... I'm getting ahead of myself. Doesn't matter. They shut down the Quake Champions League recently. Doesn't really matter, I guess. And that's because arena shooters aren't really that popular, probably for the lack of that casual appeal. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's because of this very sentiment. And the honest truth is that no PvP game will ever have a community that stays the same, skill level wise, or I don't know, just in general. Even if it does not have the sweats that we can infer that the original poster is talking about, the community will inevitably get better because that's just how it works. They're playing against each other. You will get better. And there will naturally be sweats at one point. It's impossible to keep the skill level of any game the same. It just cannot happen unless maybe all the good players keep leaving and there are new players entering all the time that refresh the player base. But even then, you would still have the above average players becoming the new sweats because everyone improves over time. Right? It just doesn't matter. You cannot keep the level of play in any game the same, no matter what you do. To assume otherwise is ridiculous. And shaming people just for being good at stuff is fucking wild. I'm not saying that good players should be treated like gods or anything, right? Because obviously that's also crazy. But back in the day, being good at a game kind of earned you a little bit of respect from the peers. If I saw someone who was better than me in a video game back in the day, I would be like, damn, that's crazy. This dude is insanely good. I want to be that good one day too. But nowadays, they just get spat on and ridiculed and made fun of, called sweats and whatnot. And it's crazy to me how in just a few years, there's been like a paradigm shift where the values of gaming, especially in PvP as a whole, has completely shifted, where all of a sudden being good is seen as a bad thing. I wouldn't be surprised if gaming companies are paying attention too, and they're probably looking for more ways where they can confine the casual part of the base, the noobs or whatever, in their own lobbies, and then quarantine all the good players all the way over there so they don't have to think about them. They never want these two player bases to cross, because when they do, you'll see tweets like this where people complain that people are good. I mean, even if they don't even see each other, you will see people that complain about people being good. I mean, back in Apex, there were so many complaints about movement and tap strafing by the casual player base when it's a PC-only technique, and the people complaining were on console. They don't even play against PC players, and we're complaining about a PC-only technique. It's crazy. And that was just because some clips went viral of people tap strafing and doing movement. That was it. So overall, it's kind of a futile effort, because at the end of the day, we're talking about people who don't want to see the game evolve because they themselves don't want to evolve while still being at the top of the food pyramid without ever having to lift a finger. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about this real quick. At the end of the day, I'm just gonna have to say skill issue. Games aren't being ruined. You're just not keeping up. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the real solution is just banning anyone who manages to get a little bit better than the average in any set game. Maybe that's the system the developers need to implement to actually save their games from dying. I don't know. It's worth a shot, right? But anyways, that was it for me. If you guys enjoyed this format, we'll maybe make more videos like it. Either way, I'll see you all next time. Peace out.